Loyal fans and newcomers both, hey, and I'm very glad to see you. So the next few episodes here on the channel are going to be a little bit different. Those of you who've been subscribed to the channel for a while might remember a duology of videos that I did a few years back, close to when I started the web show, called The Spectrum of Catastrophe. Or you might remember the crack I made about it in episode 4, or the crack I made about it last episode. I make a lot of cracks about myself. But anyway, I did them as part of this project for a special class in grad school that I was taking about music as a response to various types of disasters. I conceived of it as both a final project and a legitimate, fun, viable video for the channel because, after all, they do kind of encapsulate our entire theme here of talking about video games and music as experiential and tactile forms of art. Anyhow, where the Final Fantasy VII videos were a big analysis and appraisal, the Monster Hunter videos were a retrospective, and the Dialectical mini-series was a stream of consciousness, these two videos were more like theses that I put into video form. They involved a ton of actual research and critical thought and analysis and drawing connections. They're some of the coolest things I've done on this channel in terms of legitimate scholarly meta-analysis, and barely anybody's seen them. So, I thought, why not fix that? After all, those of you who've really been around might remember that those two videos were actually supposed to be part of a 6-part mini-series that I never really got around to finishing because I got sidetracked with other things. Maybe I'll do more. You know how it goes by now. So what we're going to be doing is folding those two videos into the main show here, although I am going to be chopping them into smaller parts to improve their watchability because, after all, this is a tiny channel and no one's going to sit there and watch an hour-long video on a channel they know nothing about. Now, if you still want to watch the original video in its full length, that is still up and I'm not going to take that down. However, aside from these cuts, the videos will be presented in their original format, meaning that you're going to see some less than stellar video quality and editing choices. Don't hold that against me. This was 3 years ago before I really knew how to do any of this. However, you're also going to see a version of me that weighs less, so I guess it balances out. So without further ado, we here at Team Real New present 3AM Soliloquies, present The Spectrum of Catastrophe, presents 3AM Soliloquies by Team Real New. Enjoy. Now, if you watched the introductory video, you know the 6 games that we'll be taking a look at here. But if you didn't, that's fine too, because as opposed to one video on 2 games like I said I was gonna do, I'm instead starting with 2 videos on 1 game each. That's because this video ended up being way longer than I anticipated, but that's because there's a lot to talk about here. And just as well, since Stranding is not only the longest and probably the most unique game on this list, but also because its central premise is used to explore such a wide range of both grounded and fantastical themes. Everything from isolation and the importance of interpersonal relationships, to the horror and permanence of war, to the threat of nuclear annihilation, to the idea of humans being the greatest danger to themselves. Stranding's nearly 60-hour playtime gives it the pacing to explore all these themes in depth. And to do this many ideas justice, you need an equally nuanced soundtrack. So before we can talk about how sound design helps the game to do what it does, we need to talk about what it does. Well, what does it do?
Tell me, Sam, what does America mean to you?
To describe the game briefly, and I do mean briefly, since describing it more in depth would take hours, Stranding has the player take control of Sam Porter Bridges, played by Norman Reedus. After a mysterious event called the Death Stranding rocks the world and causes the dissolution of society at large, Sam is commissioned by the UCA, the new incarnation of the USA, to take this device called the Cupid across the country and rebuild a wireless network in order to reconnect everyone who was stranded by the Stranding. This is your primary goal, but you're also tasked by the dying president of the UCA on the East Coast, Bridget Strand, who happens to be your mom, to rescue your sister, Amelie, the heir to the presidency who's being held hostage by terrorists on the West Coast. This is the basic premise, and when described this way, the game doesn't seem all that complex. But that's only the science fiction side. When you involve the supernatural beats in your explanation, it gets so much crazier. The Stranding itself is this ghoulish disaster that blurred the lines between the waking world and the world of the dead, and that had all kinds of effects. For example, humans became aware of the true nature of life after death via this place called the beach, which is essentially the in-between realm of our world and the other side, where the soul departs the body and crosses into the world of the dead. This is the natural process, but unfortunately, they only become aware of this because these ghostly, monstrous interlopers called beached things, or BTs, can cross the beach back into the real world, where they kill and wreak havoc. And to make matters even worse, this strange phenomenon called timefall starts happening, where precipitation from the beach causes things to move forward in time at an accelerated rate. Anything, living or inanimate. This means buildings fall apart faster, metal rusts quicker, birds die in midair when they get caught in storms, plants bloom and die under your feet, and the very landscape erodes at a faster rate. But like with anything, humans adapted. A secret government project produces these eerie babies called bridge babies, which allow their user a peek into the other side so they can see BTs and evade them accordingly. Bridge babies, also called BBs, are born from a still mother and therefore exist right on the line of life and death, and so connect living humans to the other side. More mysteriously, some people develop this strange condition called dooms that gives them new powers derived from the Stranding. For some people, that means they can sense BTs. For some people, it means they can teleport. Some can actually summon BTs. It all depends. For Sam, this means that not only can he return from the dead through this trippy mechanic called repatriation, but his blood is also fatal to BTs, and so Sam basically becomes the front line between humanity and the BTs, using his blood as a weapon.
For the first time in history, a human being has defeated a BT.
The Stranding also drags this crazy ghost soldier, played by Mads Mikkelsen, back from hell, and he hunts you throughout the game. And then on top of all of this, you're also fighting against roving bands of terrorists who call themselves Homo Demons, whose motivations provide the major villain arc of the game. Even with all this explanation, there's still some stuff I'm leaving out. The bottom line is, this is a big game with a lot of big themes. It's very likely that later I'm going to put out another video exploring the various instances of symbolism in this game, as many words and phrases are taken from multiple meanings, like strand, for example. But for now, I want to focus strictly on what links to sound design and music. So for our purposes, there's 4 big overarching narrative threads. The expedition from the East Coast to the West Coast, your battle against rogue human elements, your duels against the ghost veteran, who we later find is named Cliff Unger, and the supernatural Death Stranding, what it is, and how to make it stop. Each of these 4 disasters explores a different type of catastrophe, but all of them link to our understanding of disasters in the real world. So as you're probably gathering by now, there's a lot of moving parts in Death Stranding's story, but reducing it down to these 4 primary components makes it easier to talk about. And since each of these plot threads is so distinct, we'll talk about all of them, in order of most grounded to craziest.
I'm telling you, it's like a game.
Your first and primary mission in the game is rebuilding the UCA, which constitutes traveling across the country, delivering cargo, and linking its estranged residents via the Cupid, a device which functions on what they call the chiral network. The chiral network uses an element called chiralium in the atmosphere, which is typically found on the beach, but because of the Death Stranding, it's all mixed up now. That means that while you're adventuring across the world, you have to brave things like timefall and BTs. It's no wonder that nobody goes outside. Sam's journey is dangerous, and it's mostly his burden to bear alone. In the world of the Death Stranding, delivery people, or porters, are heroes that perform the important task of connecting people who can't, or shouldn't, do it themselves. Now, is this all sounding familiar? Like maybe it was inspired by current events? Well, guess what? Death Stranding came out in late 2019. That's right, for all its similarities to our current pandemic predicament, Death Stranding actually predated it completely, leading many people to compare it to one of Kojima's previous video games, Metal Gear Solid 2. in that they both predicted situations that would come in the near future after the game was actually made. The difference between a ghostly apocalypse and a viral pandemic, of course, notwithstanding. Let's discuss the main journey first, the actual trip from the East Coast to the West Coast. We'll leave the insanity that frequently interrupts the trip for later. But since this is such an eclectic soundtrack, drawing from so many different genres and moods, I first want to give you a broad overview of the central soundtrack, which I think is ironically the least discussed part of the game. Let's talk about the main composers for the game, Joel Korelitz and Ludwig Forssell, a composer at Kojima Productions who had previously worked with Kojima on Metal Gear Solid 5. Kojima didn't give the two of them a ton of direction. He basically told them his general idea, gave them the score of the movie It Follows, and they went on their way. He wanted something unlike anything that had come before, so Korelitz and Forssell went to hardware stores and bought everything from rubber mallets to metal ventilation to paint cans to pieces of wood, and over the course of 3 days they just experimented. One of the central things that was done was the creation of a specially prepared piano. For those watching this unfamiliar, this was an innovation of John Cage, a famous avant-garde composer notable for his radical ideas on the relationship between sound, space, and the observer. You take a piano, you stick all kinds of crap in it, and then when you hit it and play it in different ways, it sounds different. So essentially, Korelitz took these percussive avant-garde acoustic sounds and wrote music out of them, and the soundscape ended up being a duality of things. On the one hand, synthesized tracks from Forssell. On the other hand, more avant-garde horror-esque compositions from Korelitz. These two guys set out to capture the realistic and supernatural elements of the game in equal parts. To make the music even more unique, the game used a third-party audio engine that did some procedural generation, i.e. reactive to the gameplay, to build out a system that was meant to keep the score unique. Forssell's feeling was that all the different tracks in their pot of sounds should all work together, whatever the order. Whether you're an avid gamer like me, or have never played a game in your life, if the process I'm describing to you right now sounds unique, it is. But then again, Kojima's ultimate goal with this game was the creation of a brand new genre, which he titled Strand Game. But like anything extremely avant-garde, only some people really saw the vision, while others dismissed it entirely. But the bottom line is, this was an extremely unique score. Because of its conglomeration of unrecognizable acoustic noises and a variety of synthesizers, it's difficult to talk about the score strictly in terms of instrumentation. As we look at examples, I'll probably describe a lot of things as unrecognizable or undefined, and when I do, know that it was an intentional decision for the game.
Hard to imagine it now.
So we're going to stop here for now. Most of this was set up in an explanation of methodology, but tune in next time and we'll get into some actual analysis, looking at the inspirations of the game's soundtrack and some discussion about how it actually plays into what the game has to say about the wider world. Don't go anywhere.